Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. Conquest and Resistance, the Moro Wars of 1901-13, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, The Spanish and American Conquest of the Philippines. In the late 16th century, the Philippines came under Spanish rule. For the next 3 centuries, Spain ruled the archipelago, establishing a colonial government, converting the native population to Catholicism, and introducing new crops and animals to the islands. The Spanish initially faced resistance from the native Filipinos, who had their own political and religious systems. However, through a combination of military force, diplomacy, and conversion, the Spanish were able to establish control over much of the Philippines. In 1898, the United States acquired the Philippines from Spain in the Treaty of Paris. This was part of a larger effort by the United States to expand its influence in the Pacific and establish itself as a global power. The initial U.S. efforts to establish control over the Philippines were met with resistance from both the native Filipinos and the Moro people in the southern part of the archipelago. The Moros were predominantly Muslim and had long resisted Spanish rule, and they continued to resist American rule as well. Despite the resistance, the United States was able to establish a colonial government in the Philippines, with William Howard Taft serving as the first civilian governor. The U.S. colonial government introduced a number of reforms, including improved infrastructure, expanded education, and the creation of a modern legal system. However, the U.S. colonial government was also criticized for its brutal tactics in suppressing the Philippine Revolution of 1896-98, which sought to establish an independent Philippines. The U.S. military employed scorched earth tactics and concentration camps, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of Filipinos. Despite these criticisms, the U.S. colonial government continued to exert control over the Philippines until the country was granted independence in 1946. The legacy of Spanish and American colonialism is still felt in the Philippines today, with many Filipinos speaking Spanish and English, practicing Catholicism, and using Western technologies and practices. Overall, the Spanish and American conquest of the Philippines is a complex and multifaceted history. While the arrival of the Spanish brought significant changes to the archipelago, it also resulted in the subjugation of the native population. Similarly, while the American colonial government introduced many reforms, it also employed brutal tactics in its efforts to maintain control. Understanding this history is essential for understanding the Philippines today. Chapter 2: The Moros and Their Way of Life. The Moro people are predominantly Muslim and have lived in the southern Philippines for centuries. They have their own distinct culture, customs, and way of life, which differ from those of the predominantly Catholic Filipinos in the north. One of the most important aspects of Moro culture is Islam, which was introduced to the southern Philippines by Arab and Malay traders in the 14th century. Today, most Moros are Sunni Muslims, and their religion plays a central role in their lives. They pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, and give alms to the poor. Another important aspect of Moro culture is the concept of adat, which refers to a complex set of traditional laws and customs that govern Moro society. Adat covers everything from marriage and inheritance to the use of natural resources and the resolution of disputes. It is based on the principle of mutual respect and cooperation, and emphasizes the importance of community and family. One of the most visible aspects of Moro culture is their clothing, which is distinctive and colorful. Men typically wear the barong Tagalog, a traditional shirt made from pineapple fibers, while women wear the malong, a tube-like skirt that can be worn in a variety of ways. Both men and women often wear head coverings, such as the songkok or the hijab. Moro society is organized around extended families, with several generations living together in a single household. The head of the household is usually the oldest male, and he is responsible for making decisions and resolving disputes. Moro society is also hierarchical, with elders and religious leaders holding significant power and influence. Moro cuisine is another important aspect of their culture. It is heavily influenced by the cuisine of neighboring countries, such as Malaysia and Indonesia, and features a variety of spices and flavors. Popular dishes include biryani, a rice dish flavored with spices and meat, and satay, grilled meat on skewers served with a peanut sauce. Overall, the Moro people have a rich and distinct culture, shaped by their religion, traditions, and history. Understanding their way of life is essential for understanding the complex and multifaceted history of the Philippines. Chapter 3: The Battle of Bud Dajo. The Battle of Bud Dajo took place on March 7, 1906, on the island of Jolo in the southern Philippines. It was one of the most significant conflicts of the Moro Wars, pitting several hundred Moro warriors against a force of around 800 American soldiers. The Moros had taken refuge on the mountain of Bud Dajo, seeking to evade American control and resist the imposition of U.S. rule. The Americans, under the command of Brigadier General Leonard Wood, decided to mount an assault on the mountain to force the Moros to surrender. The battle began early in the morning, with the Americans using artillery to bombard the Moro position. The Moros responded with musket fire, arrows, and spears, but were quickly overwhelmed by the superior firepower of the Americans. Despite this, the Moros fought fiercely, refusing to surrender even as their numbers dwindled. The battle lasted for 2 days, with the Americans using machine guns and grenades to penetrate the Moro defenses. In the end, around 800 Moros were killed, including women and children who had sought refuge on the mountain. Only 6 Americans were killed in the battle, although many others were injured. The aftermath of the Battle of Bud Dajo was controversial, with many Americans questioning the morality of the attack. Some saw it as a necessary means of subduing the Moros and establishing U.S. control over the southern Philippines, while others saw it as a brutal and unnecessary use of force. Despite the controversy, the Battle of Bud Dajo had a significant impact on the Moro people and their resistance to American rule. It solidified their determination to resist U.S. control and defend their way of life. It also highlighted the brutal tactics used by the U.S. military in its efforts to maintain control over the Philippines. Today, the Battle of Bud Dajo is remembered as a tragic chapter in the history of the Moro people and the Philippines. It serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggles for independence, self-determination, and human rights, and the importance of respecting the dignity and sovereignty of all peoples. Chapter 4: The Moro Rebellion. Despite the initial victories of the United States in the Moro Wars, the Moros continued to resist American rule through a series of small-scale rebellions. These rebellions were sparked by a number of factors, including the U.S. government's attempts to disarm the Moros and regulate their customs and traditions. The Moro Rebellion began in 1903, when the U.S. colonial government introduced a series of laws aimed at regulating the practice of Islam among the Moro people. These laws included a ban on polygamy and the regulation of Islamic schools and religious leaders. The Moros saw these laws as an attack on their religion and way of life, and they launched a series of attacks against U.S. troops and colonial officials. These attacks were often small-scale and guerrilla in nature, with Moro warriors using hit-and-run tactics to avoid detection. The U.S. military responded with a series of counterinsurgency campaigns aimed at defeating the Moros and establishing U.S. control over the southern Philippines. These campaigns were marked by a number of brutal tactics, including the use of concentration camps, torture, and indiscriminate violence against civilians. Despite these tactics, the Moros continued to resist U.S. control, and the rebellion lasted for more than a decade. The U.S. colonial government eventually negotiated a peace settlement with the Moros in 1915, recognizing their right to practice Islam and maintain their cultural traditions. The legacy of the Moro Rebellion is still felt in the Philippines today, with many Moros continuing to fight for independence and self-determination. The struggle for peace and justice in the southern Philippines remains ongoing, and the lessons of the Moro Rebellion continue to resonate in the region and beyond. Overall, the Moro Rebellion was a complex and multifaceted conflict, marked by resistance, violence, and brutality on both sides. Understanding this history is essential for understanding the ongoing struggles for freedom, democracy, and human rights in the Philippines and beyond. Chapter 5: Legacy and Reflection. The Moro Wars of 1901 to 13 were a complex and multifaceted conflict, with lasting impacts on the Philippines and its relationship with the United States. The legacy of these wars continues to be felt today, shaping the political, social, and cultural landscape of the region. One of the most significant legacies of the Moro Wars is the impact on the Moro people themselves. The wars led to the displacement and relocation of thousands of Moros, who were forced to live in concentration camps and often suffered from poor living conditions and inadequate medical care. The wars also had a significant impact on the cultural identity of the Moros, many of whom saw their traditional way of life threatened by U.S. colonial rule. The Moro Wars also had a lasting impact on the relationship between the Philippines and the United States. The wars highlighted the complex power dynamics between a colonial power and its subject people, and the challenges of achieving genuine self-determination and democracy in the face of external control. The U.S. colonial government's use of violent and repressive tactics also raised questions about the limits of military power and the role of humanitarianism in international conflicts. Today, the legacy of the Moro Wars is felt in the ongoing struggles for independence and self-determination in the southern Philippines. The Moros continue to fight for their cultural identity and political autonomy, and their struggle is a reminder of the importance of respecting the dignity and sovereignty of all peoples. Reflecting on the Moro Wars can also provide valuable lessons for contemporary conflicts and issues. The wars highlight the importance of listening to marginalized communities, respecting their cultural traditions, and working towards genuine dialogue and understanding. They also remind us of the importance of valuing human life and dignity, and the need to prioritize nonviolent solutions to conflict. Overall, the legacy of the Moro Wars is a complex and multifaceted one, shaped by resistance, violence, and cultural exchange. Understanding this legacy is essential for understanding the Philippines and its ongoing struggles for peace, justice, and democracy. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.